So let's start with what I think people sometimes forget, that a number is just a number. So clients come and say, oh, how many users did we have? How many page views did we have? And my question back is always, how is that relevant? So knowing that you had 3,300 page views, users, 15,000 page views, is that really important? What are you going to do with it? Nothing, really, just as you're not going to do anything by knowing that you had 50,000 impressions. What we need to focus on is trying to get some action out of the data. Reporting is fine. We know it's something that is a necessary evil that we need to do, but if you can't glean any action, if you can't do nothing with it, then there's no point. And we start making the data actionable by adding some context. Easiest way, one of the easiest way to do that, time comparisons. At least here now we know that, okay, in the case of this site, they've had a decline of traffic. We don't know yet if there's a good or bad, but at least we know something a little bit more beyond they had 4,300 users. And we can add context in Google Analytics by doing a few things, by comparing time periods, but also by adding segments, by adding secondary dimension, and by comparing metrics. So the other thing that people tend to do is, apart from obsessing about numbers, is obsessing about too many numbers. And I've seen dashboards that look like that. I've seen Excel sheets with hundreds of reports and 40 million tabs that no one realistically is ever going to look at, apart from the people that are actually implementing those reports or creating them because they like them. So within Google Analytics itself, there are over 200 to 300 metrics and dimensions that can be combined in any given way. So if you do not start with a question in mind, if you're not particularly focused and know exactly what is it that you're trying to understand and what metrics are important to your business, you could potentially spend a whole day in there looking at data and not coming up with any action or anything useful whatsoever. And in order to be able to do that, to actually decide what should I be focusing on, the first exercise that I do with my clients, and not just myself, anyone who does my job, any respectable analytics consultant, will be to sit down with a client and do a marketing and measurement model. Well, we sit down and we ask ourselves, what is the purpose of our site? The purpose of our site is clearly not to generate page views. The purpose of the site will be to fill out those bedrooms, will be to hopefully get those weddings booked, those group booked, the restaurant booked, the spa booked, the golf course booked, but not something as, something like, well, page views or pages per session. That's not what we're trying to do here. So what we want to sit down is try to figure out, okay, what are the 3-4 main goals of our site? And then we pick 3 or 4 metrics that are going to be tightly related to that specific goal. So if we're trying to increase, let's say, online our conference groups, and we have a form online that allow people to send an inquiry for a group, then we want to measure that form submission. We want to measure how many people download a conference brochure. We want to measure how many people view our floor plans. So we have 3 metrics there, and those are tied to our objective. And we do that for each key business objective that we're trying to achieve with our site, and then we obsess about that. Everything else we can look at, but unless it's relevant and unless we can action it, you should not actually worry about it. And before you start any campaign, you want to make sure that your main KPIs and your main goals are actually set up in the analytics tool, because nothing in GA is retroactive. So if it hasn't been set up, then it's not going to get tracked. The other thing you need to focus on is not just what happens is acquiring the traffic, but it's also what happens once they get to the site and then after. One of the biggest mistakes I see is when I look at clients' data and the client says to me, oh, we had this great campaign, fantastic campaign. And I said, how was the campaign fantastic? Well, we had 900,000 impressions and we had 100,000 clicks to the site. And then when I look at that traffic, I see that traffic had a 98% bounce rate. So basically, you've just paid for 98% of your traffic to land on the site and leave immediately. That cannot be a great campaign. That is not a successful campaign. So you want to look at what happens before, so how did you acquire them, but then also what happens after you bought them. Those things out of the way, which are the basics, the 101, the main principles that I really always try to get clients to look at, it's now we log into GA, and one of the things that people always ask me is, well, where do I start? Well, I get lost, I don't know what to look at. So where I start, personally, if somebody asks me, okay, whenever I get a new client, I log in and I start with the traffic. I look at the traffic because the traffic tells me a lot about a company. And what I do is I switch the view. I move away from the table and I switch. We can see here, I have highlighted in yellow. I switch to a more visual view because it's easier to process. So what I see now, so this is one hotel chain, real data. And I see that, well, most of the traffic is paid. I see that PPC is number 1. Display Facebook is number 3. So I'm asking myself, what's happening with organic? Organic should be your number 1. Like the vast majority of your traffic shouldn't be paid. So the fact that they have to pay so much traffic, that already gives me alarm bells. Then I'm seeing that we have capitals in the tracking parameters. So that again makes me worry because I'm thinking, okay, they probably don't have a tracking strategy. Do we have duplicates? And yes, we do have duplicates, which we can see here in the bottom right. So I already know I need to tell the client, okay, we need to talk about your tagging strategy, number 1. And number 2, we need to talk about your paid traffic and what's happening with organic. When I kind of switch the view, then I look at, instead of looking at the view here when I'm looking at the revenue, now I'm comparing to the site average. And I'm looking at e-commerce conversion rate. So now what I'm seeing is that not only is this company buying so much traffic, but the traffic that they're buying converts a much lower rate than the free traffic. So why are you spending this money? Why are you buying so much PPC traffic that has a conversion rate which is 38% lower than your site average? So to me, that's already a big alarm bell. Then I'm also seeing, though, that the TripAdvisor traffic and the Bing traffic down here, those ones, that's also paid traffic, but their conversion rates are much higher. TripAdvisor is showing a 174% higher conversion rate than average, and I'm seeing Bing has got a 75% conversion rate higher than average. So I would say to the client, well, can we maybe take some of the money that you're spending on display or on Google and move it to TripAdvisor and Bing, because that traffic is actually doing quite well. And the organic traffic also has a higher than average conversion rate. So what are we doing about organic? So within about 2 minutes of being on the client site and looking at the data, I already have some actionable information that I can use, and I can start questioning what are you doing about that. So the first thing you want to do is focus on the money. If you're buying something, ask yourself, am I wasting it? Because agencies are really, really good at making everything look really, really great. But the reality is that it's not always as good and as great. So look at the data yourself and look at what GA is showing you from that point of view. Then the other thing you want to do is, are there any referrers that you're not paying for that are sending you good quality traffic? Could you maybe establish a partnerships there? Are there any paid traffic channels that are actually doing really well? And there you could increase your business from there. If you see your own domain in the list, then you've got some tracking issues.